I'm the founder of Master The NEC. And today's webinar is a part 3 of a 7-part series. And on today's webinar, we're going to talk about storable pools. So, kind of to wrap it up, if you're new to Master The NEC, we have a website you can go to. It's masterthenec.com. Of course, you can go to .org and .net as well. If you have any emails, it's info, I-N-F-O, at masterthenec.com, and we'll answer any of those code questions you might have that deals with the National Electrical Code. If you're interested in the wire and cable industry, we'll also more than happy to answer your ASTM or UL questions for those different standards. More than happy to answer those questions. We also have a message board you can go to at that masterthenec.com. You click on the message board link and you can join in, get an account, and actually join in the chatting and the messaging on our website. Again, visit Twitter at Master The NEC, and of course we have a Facebook page as well for Master The NEC. Well, if you've watched this series here up to this point, we're at part 3. We covered part 1 in Article 680, which is the general requirements. So we're not going to recover those here in part 3. You can go back and watch that in the part 1 series, which is available on our YouTube channel. And you can watch part 2, which we did, which it's a lengthy part. It's about 2.5 hours, but there's a lot of information in there. And rather than just touch on things like the equipotential bonding, we talked on all of the aspects pretty much of part 2. We didn't get overly detailed, but we did dig into the weeds a little bit. Sometimes presenters, kind of gloss over the top, and that cuts the time down. But it's 2.5 hours, so we covered it pretty well. So now we're moving on into part 3 of the 7-part series, and this one is dealing with storable pools, storable hot tubs, spas, and what have you. So we're going to jump into that, but the first thing we need to do is we need to understand, as far as the National Electrical Code is concerned, what is a storable pool. So in order to do that, let's go on and look at the picture here on the screen. And what we're dealing with here is a storable pool. Now, what does it say? A storable pool, wading or immersion pool, or storable portable spas and hot tubs. They're kind of those inflatable spas and hot tubs that you can see out there in the industry. Kind of came on in the last couple years. Those that are constructed on or above the ground. Okay, so any storable pool, the first thing we have to understand is it's on or above the ground. Okay, it's not in the ground, it's on or above it. And they're capable of holding water to a maximum depth of 42 inches. Now, we saw when we watched part 2, we were dealing with permanent pools. They were in excess of 42 inches. Here, there's some limitations. One, due to the nature of the construction of these storable pools. The walls simply can't handle that pressure of all that water in it. So you do have a limitation in height for these type of pools. So typically the storable pool and the standards associated with them are going to keep them about 42 inches or less. Or pool, spa, or hot tubs with a non-metallic molded polymeric walls. These are those pools that are, the walls are made of plastic. Again, they're going to be 42 inches or less in depth. Okay, so they meet that requirement as well. But these are kind of like a molded polymeric walls. They're the thin walls that go around, again, to limit the amount of water that's associated with those. And then, of course, you have inflatable fabric walls, regardless of the dimensions. Really doesn't matter the size or what have you in those. That's what you're dealing with. And, of course, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about those fabric type of sidewalls here. This is a storable pool. Even if the depth was greater than 42, it still would be considered a storable pool at that point. All right. So we're going to come back here to me and say, okay, so we kind of got an understanding now what a storable pool is. We've kind of laid the groundwork for it. We understand the depths that are associated with it. We've covered all of those things. We've built ourselves up to this point. We've talked about part 1, which is the general requirements. We talked about part 2, which we're covering the permanently installed pools. Remembering that part 2 also includes part 1, so you have to meet all the requirements in part 1 as well, which is the general rules. You have general underwater luminaire rules that are in there that are applied broadly. And so we've come all to that point. We've talked about the equipotential bonding grid and the different options. And if you didn't watch that video, or if you're coming in here on the part 3 and you're not familiar with the equipotential bonding grid, tying metal parts together, and all those type of aspects of it, you need to go back and watch part 2. Because what we're dealing with here is getting into storable pools and the storable hot tubs and spas. Totally different. Again, depth is at 42 inches or less. You know, it's going to be the polymeric type, or it's going to be the fabric and inflatable type. All of those aspects of it, or any other pool, they're going to be on or above ground as well. Okay, so you can have an on-ground or above-ground pool that's considered permanent, again, if the walls are, or the depth is greater than 42 inches. Okay, typically not one that you're going to break down and store. Okay, so that's the kind of scenario that we're dealing with. So without further ado, let's go on and get into storables, dealing with part 3, and see if we can't knock that out here in part 3. All right, so what we're dealing with here is storable pools. We have the general, we have pumps that are associated with these storable pools. We have the GFCI requirements that we're going to be talking about. And again, you have to remember that we also talked about this when we talked about permanently installed pools. So we talked about the GFCI requirements, receptacles no closer than 6 feet. The required one, at least the one for the required, we kind of call that the maintenance receptacle. You know, that needs to be within no closer than 6, but no further than 20. We talked about all those aspects. So now we're going to talk about, you know, the GFCI requirements that are dealing with the storable pools. 680.33, we're talking about the luminaires that can be associated with the storable pool. And we'll talk about 680.34, which is the receptacle locations and what have you. So again, we got to get a definition. We already kind of covered this. We want to make sure we hammer it home. We really hammer it home, because this is where people get confused between whether it's considered a storable or a permanently installed pool. First and foremost, those that are constructed on or above the ground. So there you go. There's your first qualification. The next thing you're looking at is to see what is the depth of the maximum depth of the water that it can hold. If it is 42 inches or less, then it is a storable swimming, wading, or immersion pool. Now, it also goes on to say, or a pool with non-metallic molded polymeric walls. Okay, still going to have your depth requirement. It's by the nature of the non-metallic molded polymeric wall, it's going to be very limited. It's going to allow only a certain amount of water in it due to its construction. Of course, then you get into inflatable walls regardless of the dimensions. So it really doesn't matter the depth when you're dealing with the inflatable walls. So you're going to have limitations to the storable pools, but when you get into those inflatables and things like that, inflatable hot tubs and spas, we've seen those, all of those type of things. Then what you're getting into is you understand that these storables, they really aren't a limitation on the depth with the inflatables, but they are going to be limited because of the amount of sidewall pressure the water presents. So they're probably not going to get too deep to worry about. Now this is an example. It doesn't really matter the dimensions, doesn't really matter the depth. The way this is designed, here's that exterior pump here, and we'll talk about the pumps in a minute, but this doesn't matter to the depth. This is still a storable pool. All right, so 680.30, what is it telling us in the general requirement? Things that we have to understand up front. All right, so electrical installations at storable pools, storable spas, or storable hot tubs shall comply with the provisions of Part 1 and Part 3. So we're in Part 3, so we meet these requirements. Now, we're also going to have to meet the general requirements of Part 1, okay? And that is in Part 1 of this video series. Go back and watch that. That is all the general rules that we have to follow. Then you get into the requirements here of Part 3, and that's what we're going to discuss today. All right? Storable pools shall comply again with Part 1 and Part 3 of Article 680. And remember the hierarchy of the code now. Chapters 1 through 4 will apply generally throughout the code. 5, 6, and 7 will amend chapters 1 through 4. And to be honest with you, they can actually amend the scope of 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so they are to modify, change, or add to. Okay, so always keep the general requirements in chapter 1 through 4 as what it is. Those are the general scoping requirements. Now we get up into chapter 6, and that's when we're dealing with some of the things that are going to augment or change or modify what is the general rules that we're following down in chapters 1 through 4. Most notably, chapter 2, dealing with some of the aspects in there, most notably grounding and bonding and those type of natures that you find in Article 250. So when you're dealing with the pumps, okay, we're talking about pumps for storable pools now. It says a cord-connected pool filter pump shall incorporate an approved system of double insulation or its equivalent, okay, and shall be provided with the means for grounding only the internal and non-accessible, non-carrying metal parts of the appliance. This is going to be done through the listing of that pump through the company that manufactures that pump. The means for grounding shall be an equipment grounding conductor that is going to be in the cord that runs to this pump, and in the flexible cord that is properly terminated in a grounding type attachment plug having a fixed grounded contact member. Okay, so 3-prong plug with your grounded terminal plug. Now, cord connected pool filter pumps shall be provided with a ground fault circuit interrupter that is integral part of the attachment plug, so it's at the end on the attachment plug, or it's located in the power supply cord within 12 inches of the attachment plug. Okay, so that's important to understand there as far as the makeup of those pumps. So the GFCI is either integrated into the cord at the plug in, or it's within 12 inches of that attachment plug. And if you go back and look at part 1, you see when we talk about GFCI devices in the general rule in 680.5, you're going to see that it shows a GFCI device that is actually integral to the cord, and that kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about there. Now, 680.32, GFCI protection required. Ground fault circuit interrupters required. All electrical equipment, including the power cords, which we just talked about, used with storable pools, shall be protected by ground fault circuit interrupter. Now, hopefully in this case, we're going to take care of it with the pump aspect of it. Okay, but now when we get into 32, we're just getting into the general requirements, so it's not always just about the pump here when we're talking here. Now, it goes on to say all 125 volt, and remember, if you heard me talk about this in part 2, this is kind of a key in to tell you that the 125 volt is dealing with the device is what we're really talking about. If it was 120, we'd be talking about the actual branch circuit itself, but here we're talking about a device, and it says all 125 volt, which is actually a NEMA rating, 15 and 20 ampere receptacles located within 20 feet of the inside wall of a storable pool, storable spa, or storable hot tub shall be protected by a ground fault circuit interrupter. So any receptacle, no matter where you place this storable pool, if I have a receptacle that is anywhere within 20 feet of this pool, then what we're going to have is a requirement to have the GFCI protection. I think you're going to get that anyway, just like what you had with with a permanently installed pool, but it's just kind of echoing that here with a storable. Okay, so kind of matches the same requirements as a permanently installed pool in that aspect. All right, now in determining this dimension, this 20 feet, the distance is measured shall be the shortest path that you would run the supply cord of an appliance connected to the receptacle without piercing any walls, ceilings, doorways with a hinge or sliding doors, window openings, and other effective permanent barriers. It's kind of a good rule because sometimes people put a storable pool in a certain location and there's a sliding door. And then inspectors have argued that just on the other side of the sliding door there's a receptacle, so it's within 20 feet. And so they're saying, well, it might be the living room receptacle, but it needs to be GFCI protected due to the location of the storable pool. And of course, that's not the case. It's through the opening, and the opening can be shut. So it's not, the measurement is not to penetrate the opening like that. Okay. So this only applies to receptacles that will be outdoors or out near the storable pool. All right, and here's a picture of the cords that we were talking about. Here's the one that's built into the end. And of course, here's the one that's located within 12 inches of the end of the plug cap. All right, what about luminaires? All right, so we're dealing with luminaires now. This is unique because, you know, when we have storable pools, you know, we had the permanently installed pools. You had a whole lot of options here. You had wet niche, dry niche, no niche aspects of it. You had through the wall type of luminaires. And so we had all these rules, and they all are kind of covered under, you have the requirements that are generally under Part 1 for underwater luminaires, and then of course you got into Part 2 and it got a little more specific when it talked about these different types of luminaires and how they are installed. Well, obviously when you get into storable pools, you're going to have some other requirements that you have to follow as well. So let's look at the luminaires here. And basically, let's read the code language first, and I'll read it to you, and then we'll go through these numbers here. It says, an underwater luminaire, if it's installed, okay, not required, if it's installed, shall be installed in or on the wall of a storable pool, spa, storable spa, or storable hot tub. It shall comply with either 680.33a or b. So we have an A or a B. Well, let's look at A. Now, A is dealing with the within the low voltage contact limit. Okay, so we're dealing with a lower type of voltages here. And so if that's the kind of luminaire that we're dealing with, the code says the luminaire shall be part of a cord and plug connected lighting assembly. This assembly shall be listed as an assembly for the purpose of having the following construction features. Okay, and you're given 1 through 4. So first of all, it's got to be listed in a listed assembly that's designed to go and work with this storable pool. So we're looking for this listed low voltage contact assembly. It can have no exposed metal parts. Okay, so obviously all the parts outside of it are non-metallic. It has a luminaire lamp that is suitable for use at the supplied voltage. So whatever the voltage, in this case, is low contact limit. So we have to make sure that the lamp that's involved in it is suitable for use at this voltage level that we're working with. Okay. Next, it says the impact resistant polymeric lens, luminaire body, and transformer enclosure. So it all have to be an impact resistant polymeric material, and it applies to the lens, the body, and the transformer. So what we're doing here is we're really trying to get rid of any of these metallic parts on here. It's really going to be hard to do any bonding to any of that type of stuff. And again, we're not talking about permanently installed pools. So, you know, this is the kind of scope we have to look at. So it gives us some directions when we're dealing with this low voltage contact limit stuff. And then, of course, 4 says a transformer or power supply meeting the requirements of 680.23a2 with a primary rating of not over 150 volts. Now, typically this right here talks about the type of transformers that we're dealing with, whether or not it's a secondary to primary separation with a metal barrier that is actually grounded, or we have a primary to secondary isolated, double insulated or whatnot type of medium between primary to secondary separation. All right. At the end of the day, it's still not over 150 volt application. So, and we covered this extensively in Part 2. So if you're interested in understanding more about that for transformers, power supplies, dealing with these low voltage contact limit applications, and they are listed for pool and spa applications, then go check out 680.23a2 in your National Electrical Code, or you could go back and watch Part 2 of this 7-part series, and we'll kind of give you some details on that. Now that was A. Now, what if we want to use a luminaire in this storable pool that is actually over those low voltage contact limits, but it's not over the 150 volt limitation? And that limitation, voltage limitation, is also held back in Part 1 as well. So we have a voltage limitation which happens to be not over 150 volts. So let's talk about this one. Okay, so it's over the low voltage contact limit, which is defined in 680.2, so you can go back and look at those levels, but not over 150 volts. So a lighting assembly without a transformer or power supply, which is our general lighting application, and with a luminaire lamp operating at not over 150 volts, because they're a voltage threshold, shall be permitted to be cord and plug connected where the assembly is listed as an assembly for this purpose. Okay, so it is listed as a pool, most notably a storable pool luminaire or what have you. Okay, so look for some kind of listing here. It's actually listed as an assembly for this purpose to be used in a storable pool. Now, it says the installation shall comply with 680.23a5, and the assembly shall have the following construction features. And just to remind you that in this application here, with this one that's luminaire that's over the low voltage contact limit, this is reminded that it also has to be mounted so that it's at least 18 inches below the normal water level to the top of the lens. Okay, so that's what we're referring to here. So we're just giving you a reminder back on that application. All right, now, so in this rated or this listed assembly for this purpose, we've got some guidelines it has to meet. First, no exposed metal parts. Okay, that was very similar to the low voltage contact limit type of luminaire. Second, an impact resistant polymeric lens and luminaire body. Okay, so again, we're trying to get rid of these metal parts, and they're designed to be impact resistant because these storable pools tend to be low cost, tend to have a lot of people that just put them up to play. They don't expect them to last a long time, at least my experience with these type of storable pools. So, you know, you want to make sure that the lenses aren't going to be exposed to being touched. You know, they're kind of protected. You know, 3, it says a ground fault circuit interrupter with an open neutral conductor protection as an integral part of the assembly. Okay, so this assembly has some kind of component in there that's integrated with this ground fault circuit interrupter with an open neutral conductor protection. Okay, so that's integrated into the assembly. So this is, again, a listed assembly. 4, it says the luminaire lamp permanently connected to the ground fault circuit interrupter with open neutral protection. Okay, so the luminaire lamp is permanently connected. This is all part of the assembly. You're not going to go out and make one of these yourself. Okay, you're going to get it listed, and I encourage you to Google it, and you can actually see some examples of some of these lighting assemblies that are designed for use with the storable pool. And then lastly, it says it has to be in compliance with the requirements of 680.23a. Okay, so you know, we know the guidelines here. We see the different limits that we're dealing with. So we pretty much know that we're going to get a listed application here for this type of luminaire for use in something like this. Now, the reference back to 680.23a is just saying, look, there is some requirements for the lighting design and the normal operation that you have to follow for general underwater luminaires. Okay, we got to follow that. You do have some aspects dealing with the transformers and power supplies, GFCI protection. You have the voltage limitations, which is going to apply, which is the 150 volts between conductors, and all that type of application. So keeping it in mind that it is going to say that you have to comply with the requirements of that as well. All right. So basically, this is going to take care of itself, though, if you get a listed assembly for this use. Okay. So you have the two options there that we're dealing with the storable pools. Okay. All right, let's move on. All right, what about the receptacle locations when dealing with storable pools? It says receptacles shall not be located less than 6 feet from the inside wall of a storable pool, because that's pretty, that matches the permanently installed pool. It says, in determining these dimensions, again, the distance measured shall be the shortest path the supply cord of an appliance connected to the receptacle would follow without piercing a floor, a wall, a ceiling, a doorway with a hinge, sliding door, and what have you. So again, very similar to what we've seen elsewhere when we've talked about this subject, when we're dealing with maintaining the measurement. Incidentally, I will tell you that this has been utilized as well in the 2017 code when you're dealing with, say, that receptacle under the kitchen sink. In the 2014 code, it said that any receptacle within 6 feet from the sink is going to require GFCI protection. However, the intent was not to penetrate the cabinet door, but of course didn't really say that in the 2017, in the 14. But you are going to see this language in the 2017 that's saying, look, that receptacle underneath the sink does not have to be GFCI because it's in a cabinet and it has a door cover on it. And you don't do the measurement through the door, okay, of the cabinet. Okay, so that's kind of some things you have coming. If you want to learn all of those nuances of the new 2017 code that's going to be coming out here in a couple months, watch for our webinar on the important changes from the 2014 to the 2017, and I think you'll find a lot of neat things in there. A lot of changes that took place between the 14 and the 17, and a lot of them were very good. Some of them, maybe not so much, but again, it's a work in progress as always. One thing I will remind you is that the yellow you see here is in the 2014, and the white is what you see in the 2011. So they did add a couple words here. They added in the storable spas and hot tubs to kind of bring them along into this fold here. All right, Well, let me go back. Believe it or not, that was a short one. 25, 30 minutes. I told everybody that the longest part is going to be part 2. We've already accomplished that. If you've already watched it, you're already ahead of the game, because every part here on out is going to be a little shorter. Storable pools are not that complicated. Okay, you just have to remember to treat them as they are. Now, they're not referencing back to part 2. They're referencing back to part 1. So you're dealing with part 3 and part 1. Okay, so if it's a storable pool, you're not into this equipotential bonding. You're not into that aspect of it. Now, you do have the receptacle clearance locations that we talked about. But when you look at it, and I like to encourage people to zoom back over it. I look at it all the time, and you'll notice that you really don't have any reference. Again, it's part 1 to part 3. There is no reference here dealing with sending you back to part 2. So what would that tell you? You don't have the requirements of part 2 to meet. It might make some reference back to some componentary parts of part 2 in order to make reference like we did in the luminaire aspect of it. But in general, part 3 is pretty much the way it is. It encompasses part 1, which is the general, but then it brings in its own part 3, so it kind of works as itself. So hopefully that helped you out a little bit. If you have any questions or anything we didn't cover, feel free to email me at info, that's INFO, at masterthenec.com. More than happy to answer your questions. Again, I'm not a guru. I do happen to hold, as you see back here, 2 degrees. One is a bachelor's in engineering, and the other is in management. But they don't help you with code. You go through school, engineering, you don't learn code. You come to people like me to learn code. And so thanks for watching. Hopefully, if you have any additional questions, you will email us. You will visit our website. You will share these videos with other people who are learning the code. Again, if you know everything there is about 680, then why are you watching this video? Okay, if you want to click the thumbs down because you're watching this video and you disagree, why are you watching this video? This video is for people who want to learn about Article 680. These are for the students in the industry, electricians who want to learn a little more, inspectors who want to learn a little more. Okay, we're here to give you this information, and there's a lot of educators out there in the country. We all have one thing in common. We want to help you learn the National Electrical Code. That's what we do. I learn something new every day when it comes to the NEC. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you'll enjoyed it, and next time you'll stay tuned for part 4, where we deal with hot tubs and spas. That'll be a good one. See you then.